pedal people, this is my top 5 favorite pedals of the year video for 2022, and I start off by saying this every year, but it really is so tough to pick just 5 pedals. Especially this year, it was particularly rough, but I think we got there. So to start off, when narrowing down this list, I thought of pedals that not only sounded amazing, but also were particularly fun or inspiring for me and my kind of playing style. Basically, if it sounds awesome, I'm having a good time, and it inspires me to want to play more guitar, then that's exactly what this list is. A quick disclaimer, this isn't limited to pedals that came out this year, this is picking from a pool of pedals that I acquired this year. So as long as I got it in 2022, it's fair game. And with that being said, I'm really excited to talk to you about these pedals and show you what they are, so let's do that. The first pedal on the list this year is the Electronic Audio Experiments Model FET. And this is a pedal that surprised me a lot because I wasn't expecting it to be such a good fit for what I like to play. What convinced me to finally get one was seeing a few clips that John had posted on the EAE Instagram account comparing the Model FET to a Sun Model T in a blind shootout. I was already thinking all the clips sounded really great, and I kind of wanted to check this pedal out regardless of what the answer was. And then on top of that, in the reveal, I found out the one that I had been preferring the whole time was actually the pedal and not the amp like I had thought. So of course I couldn't get my hands on the Model FET fast enough. What I've ended up loving about it so much is that it does have a very particular sound, but it doesn't have to be shoeboxed into the doom, sludge, stoner thing. This pedal by default has a lot of low end and bass on tap, but there's a surprising amount of treble in there that really helps to balance it out, and adds a kind of jangly character that I really enjoy out of it. Every control on this pedal is very interactive with the other controls, including the 2 gain controls for bright and normal channels. You can get a lot of different EQ curves just by dialing in more of the bright and less of the normal, or doing something unexpected like dialing in more of the normal channel, which is voiced a little darker, and then pulling the bass back and diming the treble or pushing the mid-range. They all have a different effect on each other, and it's cool to kind of discover those combinations that get you the sound you want or variations of the sound you want. I also just really love how this pedal sounds in a mix. I like to put it at the end of my dirt chain so everything runs into it, and especially fuzz pedals, it really makes them stand out and gives a lot of heft and weight to it while not losing clarity and adding punch at the same time. It's probably the closest pedal I found to actually responding and feeling like a real amp. And one of the biggest reasons it's made my top 5s this year is just based on the fact that I never really want to turn it off once I have it on. This next pedal on my list, you may have guessed it because first of all, I didn't hide them very well in these little pixelated images, but I've been using it on my board ever since the day I got it. This is the Boss RE202. If I'm being completely honest, I'm a little conflicted about this one because, well, mostly because the Boss RE20 has been a staple on my board for the last 6 or 7 years, and that's kind of a sound that is very near and dear to my heart. So when I heard that Boss was coming out with an updated version, I was super excited and kind of hoping that the sounds kind of were just all there from the RE20 but with added features. And what I discovered after getting it and using it on the board for a while is that the sounds aren't quite the same as the RE20, but they are in their own way very darn good. What I love most about the 202 is first the saturation control, so you can saturate the repeats, as well as the new and old tape modes. You can kind of get it sounding different depending on which mode you have it in, and that affects the modulation as well, which leads me into my actual favorite control is the wow and flutter control. Having used the RE20 so long, I had gotten used to not being able to have that kind of warbly delay sound. That's a sound I really enjoy, so having it within the RE202 and just considering how awesome it sounds is a huge plus. And now with control over the saturation of the repeats, or even in direct mode you can turn up the saturation on your dry signal as well, you can get a lot of new textures that you couldn't previously get with the RE20. The thing I've always loved about the Space Echo, the RE20 and the 202, which is something they share in common, is that they kind of just do one sound and not much else, but the sound they do give you is done really, really well. And the 202 builds on what I really liked about the RE20 in paying homage to the quirks and sound of the original unit while giving you an updated sound that sounds more like the original. So the value in the RE202 to me is retaining that vibe of feeling like a unique, curated effect, if that makes any sense, while also providing a lot more versatility and sound variation than the RE20 ever did. I've used this pedal on nearly every recording I've done since I got it. It always seems like I can find a place for the Space Echo sound no matter what I'm playing or writing. So it's for those reasons, plus the fact that I think it sounds really cool, and that all the controls are basically on the face of the pedal, thanks boss, that this pedal made my list. This next one was a really obvious choice for me. It's the Catalan Bread Soft Focus. Surprisingly, I'm not a stickler or a fanatic for shoegaze reverb as a genre of effect, but they did say Slowdive, so I knew I just had to try this pedal out. Quite honestly, I don't really listen to Slowdive that often, but I do really like their sounds, and one of the things the Soft Focus does really well is, of course, do their sound, but also, if you don't want to shoebox yourself into the shoegaze sound, then this pedal also just does a really nice modulated, kind of bright reverb sound. What I like about this pedal a lot is that the top three controls work in tandem to simultaneously adjust the kind and amount of modulation as well as the length of the trails. I talked about this earlier with the Model FET, but I can appreciate when the controls on a pedal are highly interactive with each other. And especially on the Soft Focus combined with the mix control, which I find very linear and easy to get in between kind of sounds. It doesn't get too crazy very fast, but all those controls together give you access to such a wide range of sounds. So again, this pedal doesn't squarely align you with shoegaze. You can branch out into other things, do more subtle stuff, or even use it as an always-on reverb. I also love that in addition to the mix control, they've given us a volume knob, which is something I really value in reverb pedals, especially this one because if I'm going for the shoegaze vibe, I want to put this pedal pre-dirt, and there's nothing worse than dialing in your perfect washy sound for just the right moment, and then when you go to turn it on, no one can actually hear you because you've washed away in the mix. So having a volume knob on a reverb is pretty clutch to me, especially in the Soft Focus, being that it wants to kind of be used in that way before dirt. Or even if you have it after dirt, it's just kind of a cool way to stand out if you want to turn it on for a solo, get a little lead boost, or even leave that preamp on all the time for the extra flavor it can add. Which leads me into the last thing I wanted to mention, that there's an internal switch that you can use to engage trails so the reverb tails don't abruptly stop when you turn the pedal off. That also means that the internal preamp's going to be running all the time, which I personally think is a really neat feature if you want to add some more character to your sound. Or maybe it just makes you feel like a cool kid when you can tell people your secret sauce isn't always on preamp. And hey, I'm not judging, so if you want to, you can do that. Wink, wink. Okay, so for those reasons, and because this pedal sets out to do a very specific thing, does that specific thing very well, and also does other things that are cool, plus sounds great doing them all, it made my list. This next pedal is one that I had my eye on for a couple years before finally getting it this year. It's the Lauren Audio Mustang. And this pedal has one of the coolest saturated sounds I think I've ever played. It nails that console drive sound that's kind of gross and nasty, but in the coolest way, and also lends a lot of flavor and color to a cleaner sound. Something that surprised me is how much I absolutely love it on bass. I actually got the Tech 21 Bass Driver DI this year, which was a pedal I was looking forward to a lot to help my bass recordings, but as soon as I got the Mustang after that, I was like, oh shit, I think this may be the sound I was looking for the whole time. I just never knew how to get that kind of sound. Something cool about the Mustang is that the tone control has a big effect on how the gain sounds and how it saturates. Having the tone lower, you get a little less saturation with the gain, but it's great for kind of cleaner sounds without being too dark. And as you turn the tone up, you get more saturation out of the gain, and it gets more aggressive and bright, but never really harsh or shrill. It more so gives it that raggedy, very heavily saturated edge that I associate with console distortion. And the cool thing about that sound is that there's no, let's call it EQ fluff around the edges to kind of muddy up the mix. You get like this very solid, focused sound that's both really saturated and punchy at the same time. And there's like this cool compression to it that when you really dig in, you can feel this pedal. It's such a dynamic, cool sound to play with. And for bass, I like to keep the tone control down a little bit more, not for a darker sound, but just to kind of tame the gain range, and then use it basically like a preamp going direct into my computer for recording. It has that super cool thumpy DI sound, but with a lot of added color and flavor. I can't wait to see what else Lauren Audio does in the pedal world. The Mustang sounds super cool and also has some pretty sick art, but yeah, it made my top 5 because it's just so cool sounding and works awesome with what I like to play. Before we get to the last pedal in my top 5 list, I wanted to go over some honorable mentions because, like I said in the beginning of the video, it's very, very tough to pick just 5 pedals when there's so many cool ones to talk about. This is also my way of justifying a top 10 list, even though I've called it a top 5 list for the last couple of years. Is it cheating? Yes. Are we still gonna do it? Yes. Here we go. The first one is the Native Audio Ghost Ridge. And this is a really neat and solid reverb pedal that has presets. I think all the modes on here sound really great, and there's even a secondary control that lets you control the amount of modulation, and I think just the way they voiced it is dialed in so tastefully. It really can be a compliment to any of the modes. This is that kind of reverb pedal that you can throw on anything and basically just rely on it always sounding good. It does anything from subtle, always on reverb to kind of more atmospheric stuff without ever being too in your face about it. And that's something I personally really like because it kind of stays out of the way and lets you do your thing while still adding some spaciousness and atmosphere to your sound. And the presets on here are so great, not only in just their functionality, but in that since it does a variety of sounds, you can cycle through your presets for something that maybe is more subtle, always on, something a little more big, something more modulated and weird, or whatever you like. Native Audio always makes really solid, great stuff, and Ghost Ridge is the good stuff. Then there's the Fairfield About 900 Fuzz. And this is a really cool one because of the interaction between the fuzz control, the input gain, and of course the bias control. You can get it to do some pretty great overdrivey kind of sounds if you have the fuzz low and the input dialed up. You could try the opposite for kind of a different overdrivey texture, but it also just does a really awesome fuzz sound, where it's very distinctly fuzzy, not distortion fuzzy. And you get that without the drawbacks of the typical fuzzy kind of fuzz, like a fuzz face, where you have to have the volume fairly high to get that kind of dynamic, cool exploding saturation that those are known for. Also, I just want to take a second to appreciate that it doesn't sound like shit running into a clean amp. That's something I look for in a lot of fuzz pedals because I don't usually have the opportunity to turn my amp up super high. I'm mostly just doing recording here, so to have something that can sound good at a reasonable volume but also still sound very saturated, full, and uniquely fuzzy is really great. The next one is the Mass Effects Expanse, and this is a harmonic trem, reverb, and delay pedal all stuffed into one cool compact box. I love what they've kind of chosen to package together. Trem and reverb isn't too uncommon, but usually when you think of that combo you think, bias trem and spring reverb, but this is harmonic trem and expansive reverb. I can't overstate how well thought out everything in this pedal both feels and sounds. The fact that it does delay on top of everything else it does is super cool, and all the little details like the infinite hold for the reverb, the toggle switch positions to adjust the sound and filteriness of the harmonic trem, and even stuff like the box candy and the art have a lot of care and love put into them. And it's not only that, but the fact that this pedal just sounds really darn good and does a very unique sound. A sound that's its own thing and in itself kind of a packaged whole deal. And that's pretty freaking cool. Next is the EAE Limelight, and I like this one a lot because it feels familiar and sounds familiar, but has kind of a modern edge to it. It's kind of become my go-to for mid-push sounds, and even though it's known to have a lot of brightness and treble on tap, I enjoy it in the middle toggle position for kind of a darker sound. It has this cool way of being mellow and saturated, but still very focused. I think a lot of that's due to kind of where the mid-range sits and the fact that it does have quite a bit of treble on top. That's an aspect of the Limelight that really stands out for me because usually I like to stay on the neck pickup, and if I'm dialing in a sound that is a little more mellow and saturated there, sometimes it can get a bit muddy if I'm not too careful about stacking it with other things or more conscious about what else is going on in the mix. But with the Limelight's kind of edgy treble and bite, it allows me to dial in that sound that I really like on the neck pickup without getting lost in a track that maybe has multiple guitars going. So all that, plus that it can get pretty aggressive if you need it to, and the boost built in, which is independent, you can use it to push dirt pedals later in the chain, makes it a really awesome kind of utilitarian drive that's right at home on my board and suits the sounds I want to make really well. And last but not least is the Black Mass First Herald, which technically I did get last year, but I also did not make the demo until this year, so it counts. And this pedal is awesome because it's just a purely unforgiving force of fuzz. I love that it doesn't really hold anything back unless you want it to, in which case you can flip the toggle switch to kind of change the clipping of the fuzz and dial things that are a little cleaner or a little more mellow. But the thing I love most about this fuzz is, first of all, the scoop control, which allows you to scoop out tons of mids if you need to, but also leave it flat, which is my preferred setting. And second of all, just how good of a Big Muff inspired fuzz this is. It's that kind of heavy where I can pretend I play stoner rock, but actually use it very effectively in the kind of indie alt stuff I do. It doesn't seem to get lost in the mix, and actually I really enjoyed throwing it on multiple guitars in the same track. Usually that's hard for me to do with Big Muff inspired pedals, but for the tracks I made with the First Herald, everything just kind of worked itself out. And that's all I gotta say about this pedal. It's just super cool, super big, super fun, and it's a good pedal. So finally, the last pedal on my list, and these haven't been in any particular order, but this is my most recent pedal. It's the Caroline Arigato. I don't think I've ever slapped Velcro on a pedal faster than I have with this one. Phaser is one of my favorite effects to use, and it was really great when I heard that Caroline was coming out with their take on one, because I'd been kind of waiting for them to do a swooshy mod pedal ever since Somersault came out, because I really like their approach to modulation especially. They always seem to find ways to take what is at the heart a very classic, good sounding effect and change it up by giving you controls that are a little unusual or different, that personally for me make me think differently about how to use their effects. And that's something I appreciate about all Caroline's pedals, but especially in the Arigato, because I feel like Phaser doesn't get a whole ton of love. And what Caroline's done is they've made a really awesome sounding phaser, but it ventures into filter territory, it does univibe kind of sounds, and it even has a mix control to do phase vibrato. The control I appreciate the most is probably the aim control in the top right. It adjusts the frequency and kind of intensity of the pedal, but what's really cool about this is that it changes the entire sound of the pedal. When dialed to the left, I find there's more of those chewy, deep phaser vibes, and then on the right, you can get more of the high-mid emphasis phase that sits kind of on top of your mix and swishes everything up. Or if you dial it in more filtery, you can have those really cool watery filter sweeps. And I think that's such a great control to have, considering that the pedal does the filtery, univibey, phasey stuff, because depending on what kind of space you want to go for, you can adjust that aim control to get it sounding more like a classic univibe or more like a classic phaser, or not. One of this pedal's biggest strengths, and I think the reason why I personally like it so much, is that it's not based on any particular vintage classic phaser sound. It just kind of does its own thing. It's not trying to be what it's not, and it is what it is. So it kind of leaves it up to you as a player, and of course every time I say you, I'm talking about me because this is my experience, but there's so many freaking sounds in here that it's easy to stumble on something that you haven't heard before, or more likely is reminiscent of something you have heard before but with a cool new twist. And that's the heart of the reason why I love the Arigato, but of course I am really biased because I do love phaser and filter effects, so take that with a grain of salt, but this pedal is top tier in my books and it really is just that good. And that's it. That's the list for this year. I really hope you enjoyed listening, and I hope it wasn't too awkward. In the comments, let me know if you had a top 5 list this year. I'd love to hear what they were. Also, if you got any of the pedals that were on my list this year, I'd love to know what you think of them too. Also, thank you everyone who watches and listens, leaves really nice comments, and generally just supports me and this kind of whole pedal community that I'm really thankful to be a part of. And that extends to all the builders and the people that have so graciously and kindly sent me their pedals to try out or demo, make some music with, and share with you all. Thank you guys so much. It really means a lot to me. There's some info on the screen, some shameful self-promotion that I'm sticking here at the end of the video. I have an Instagram where I post stuff that's not necessarily like fit for a whole YouTube video. I do covers, I do stupid stuff. I also have a Bandcamp page where I post, so far, the demo tracks that I've done. Someday I plan to release an EP of some sort on there, but for now, there's some of the demo tracks up on there. And also, I have merch. I illustrated all the designs, and if you want to get something on a shirt or whatever, that's where you can do it. If you end up buying anything, that's pretty cool. And if you don't, I just appreciate you watching the video. That's also pretty cool. But yeah, that's the end of the video. Thank you guys again so much for watching, and we'll catch you next year.